When Ray Liotta passed away in May 2022, his Los Angeles home, a secluded Spanish-style villa in the Hollywood Hills, stood empty for months. The house, tucked behind dense hedges and iron gates, had been his sanctuary, a place where he spent quiet nights away from the spotlight. But after his death, something lingered within its walls. In late 2023, Mark and Olivia Caldwell, a married couple from New York, purchased the house. Mark, a film producer, was drawn to the home's history, its connection to a Hollywood legend. Olivia, a former actress turned interior designer, saw potential in restoring its faded glamour. They had no superstitions, only excitement about making it their own. From the very first night, something felt off. At first, it was subtle. The couple would hear low murmurs from empty rooms, as if someone were deep in conversation. The smell of cigar smoke drifted through the hallway, though neither of them smoked. Doors they had shut before bed were found wide open in the morning. One night, as Olivia lay half asleep, she saw a shadow move across their bedroom. She thought it was Mark until she turned and saw him still beside her, fast asleep. The basement door, which led to a small wine cellar, had a habit of unlocking itself. Once, while Mark was reviewing footage in his home office, the door behind him creaked open. He turned, expecting to see Olivia. Instead, there was nothing, only the dim hallway and a sudden drop in temperature. A few weeks later, a neighbor, Victor Garza, an elderly man who had lived on the street for over 40 years, stopped by. Over coffee, he casually mentioned, "You know, Ray never wanted to leave this house. He used to say it was the only place in Hollywood where he felt at peace." Victor then hesitated before adding, "But ever since he passed, I don't think he ever did leave." Mark, still skeptical, installed security cameras inside and outside the home. One night, reviewing the footage, he froze. At 3:15 a.m., the camera in the living room captured a figure, a man standing near the fireplace. The details were blurry, but the shape, the posture, it was eerily familiar. Then there was the voice. A single word, low and unmistakable: Karen. Mark knew that name. Everyone did. It was the way Ray Liotta had said it in Goodfellas, the way he had shouted at Lorraine Bracco's character. It sent a chill down his spine. Olivia had seen enough. Determined to reclaim their home, the couple invited a spiritual medium. As she walked through the house, she closed her eyes, listening. Then, standing in the living room, she whispered, "He doesn't want to go." She suggested they acknowledge Ray, talk to him, let him know his presence was felt. So, that evening, Mark and Olivia sat by the fireplace, poured a glass of whiskey, the actor's favorite, and simply spoke aloud. Mark raised his glass. "Ray, if you're here, we respect you. This was your home and we'll take care of it. But if you're stuck, if you're looking for something, maybe it's time to go." For the first time in weeks, the house felt still. No murmurs, no flickering lights, no cold spots. That night, they both slept deeply for the first time since moving in. Though the disturbances lessened, Olivia still swears that some nights, when the house is quiet, she hears a faint chuckle, like the sound of a man reminiscing. And sometimes, just before falling asleep, the scent of cigar smoke lingers in the air. Was Ray Liotta truly there, watching over his old home? Or was it simply the echoes of a life lived so vibrantly that even death couldn't silence it? The Caldwells may never know. But one thing is certain: some spirits never leave Hollywood. The house settled into an uneasy quiet. Mark and Olivia Caldwell carried on with their lives, adjusting to the peculiar energy that clung to the walls like an old, unshakable scent. They told themselves that whatever had lingered, whatever unseen presence had once shared their space, was now at peace. But deep down, Olivia wasn't convinced. It was in the little things. The way the air felt heavier in some rooms, especially the dimly lit hallway leading to the basement. The way her reflection in the grand hallway mirror sometimes seemed just a fraction of a second out of sync with her movements. It was irrational, she told herself. Just the tricks of an old house, the mind playing games. But then there were the nights when she woke to the sound of distant footsteps. Not Mark's. Not the creaking and settling of old wood. These were deliberate, rhythmic steps, measured, unhurried pacing somewhere just beyond her sight. She would lie still, staring at the ceiling, feeling her own pulse in her throat. She never woke Mark. Maybe out of fear of what he'd say. Maybe out of fear that if she spoke it aloud, it would become real. One night, she awoke to an overpowering scent. Cigarettes. Not the fleeting hint of smoke she had smelled before, but thick, unmistakable, as if someone had just exhaled in the darkness beside her. She turned onto her side, eyes adjusting to the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. Mark was beside her, facing away. She held her breath, listening. Then, just beyond the open bedroom door, there was the sound of a deep inhale, followed by a slow, deliberate exhale. She squeezed her eyes shut. It was nothing, just a dream, just a trick of the mind. But the scent lingered. The next morning, Olivia was quiet at breakfast. Mark noticed. He had been wrapped up in a new project, barely paying attention to the house and its strange energy. But even he could feel the weight in the air that morning. "I checked the security footage again last night," he said after a moment. "Didn't see anything." But he hesitated, swirling his coffee. "I swear I felt something, just for a second." She set down her fork. "Felt what?" He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. Presence. I was in the office, reading over scripts, and it felt like someone was standing behind me. Like, right behind me." A silence stretched between them. Olivia finally spoke, her voice quieter. "What did you do?" Mark gave a small, humorless chuckle. "I turned around." He shook his head. "Nothing there, of course. But I don't know. It's like I expected to see someone. Like my brain was already telling me they were there." She shivered and gripped her coffee mug a little tighter. Later that evening, when Mark left for a late meeting, Olivia found herself alone in the house. The realization hit her as the front door clicked shut. She didn't want to be alone here. Not because she feared an intruder. Not because she feared some vague, childish idea of ghosts. No, it was something worse than that. She feared the feeling of being watched. The weight of unseen eyes. But she wouldn't let herself be afraid. Not tonight. She poured herself a glass of wine and curled up on the couch in the living room, scrolling absently through her phone. The fireplace, once a source of warmth, now felt like a yawning mouth in the dim light. The shadows seemed deeper tonight, the corners of the room darker. And then she heard it. A voice. Low, raspy, almost familiar. "Not yet." Her body froze. The words had been soft, like a whisper in the next room. She turned slowly, her pulse hammering. Nothing. The house was still. The only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator down the hall. She stood on shaking legs, walking toward the source of the voice. The dim hallway stretched before her, leading to the basement door. A cold draft curled around her ankles. Not yet. The words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't bring herself to say them aloud. Not yet what? Her hand hovered over the basement doorknob. And then, a sound from behind it. Something moved in the darkness beyond the door. A slow, deliberate shuffle. A breath. She stumbled back, heart slamming against her ribs. The air turned ice cold. Then 3 knocks. Soft, patient. Waiting. Her breath hitched. And then, like nothing had ever happened, the scent of cigarette smoke filled the air again. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The 3 knocks faded into silence, but their echo remained in Olivia's bones, thrumming through her like an aftershock. She stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway, her breath shallow, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The basement door loomed before her, closed but somehow still ominous, as though whatever stood behind it was waiting patient, unwavering, unseen. A draft curled around her ankles, impossibly cold. The air in the house had changed. It was no longer just heavy. It was charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks the sky apart. She took a step back, then another. The hallway felt longer than before, stretching impossibly, the walls pressing in as she turned on unsteady feet and hurried toward the living room. The warmth of the fireplace was still flickering, but it no longer seemed inviting. It cast long, claw-like shadows against the walls, dancing with some unseen rhythm. Her wine glass sat untouched on the coffee table. She reached for it with trembling fingers, taking a sip, letting the bitter liquid burn down her throat. Calm down. It's an old house. That's all. Just an old house creaking and settling. But she didn't believe it, because she knew what she had heard. And worse, she had felt it. The sound of keys jangling in the front door sent a jolt of relief through her. Mark was home. She turned as he stepped inside, tossing his jacket onto the back of a chair. He looked tired, rubbing a hand over his face before noticing her expression. "You okay?" His voice was light, but his eyes studied her carefully. She hesitated. She wanted to tell him, but the words felt fragile, as if speaking them aloud would solidify something in the air, something she wasn't ready to name. Instead, she forced a small smile. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't press her, just nodded and walked toward his office. Olivia exhaled and leaned back against the couch, staring into the flames. The scent of smoke, not from the fireplace, but the same cigarette smoke from before, still lingered faintly in the air. Then, from down the hall, Mark's voice. "What the hell?" She stood immediately. "What is it?" Mark didn't answer right away. She heard him moving papers around, muttering to himself. By the time she reached his office, he was standing at his desk, flipping through a stack of handwritten pages old, yellowed, the edges curled with time. Olivia frowned. "What is that?" He turned the pages toward her, his expression unreadable. "It's a script." Her brows knit together. "Yours?" He shook his head. "No, it's Ray's." A chill crept up her spine. She stepped closer, peering at the pages. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, but unmistakably his. She had seen enough of Ray Liotta's personal notes in old Hollywood archives to recognize his distinctive scrawl. Mark flipped through the pages, skimming them with furrowed brows. "I don't get it. This wasn't here before. I mean, I've been in this office a dozen times since we moved in. Where the hell did this come from?" Olivia reached out, hesitantly touching the paper. Felt old, but not untouched, as if someone had been handling it recently. She could see smudges, faint creases where fingers had pressed too hard against the edges. She read the first few lines. It was a scene. A man in a dimly lit bar, speaking to someone unseen. The dialogue was short, clipped, almost anxious. Then, at the bottom of the page, something caught her breath in her throat. Scrawled hastily in the margin, underlined twice. "Not yet." Her stomach twisted. Her gaze snapped up to Mark. "That's what I heard," she whispered. He looked at her, confused. "What?" "In the living room," she said, swallowing hard. "I heard a voice. It said, 'Not yet.'" A silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy. Mark exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Okay," he said slowly. Maybe he left this behind. Maybe he was working on something, and it just got lost in the house." Olivia didn't reply, because she wasn't thinking about how the script had appeared. She was thinking about when. She had heard the words just an hour ago, and now, suddenly, the script was here, as if someone had placed it there for them to find. That night, Mark couldn't let it go. He sat at his desk, flipping through the pages over and over, muttering about how the script had never been mentioned in any Hollywood archives. It was unfinished, just fragments of a story, a mystery with no resolution. But there was one recurring scene that caught his attention. A man sitting alone in a bar, nursing a drink. The script described the setting in painstaking detail. The room is dim, the air thick with cigarette smoke. A neon sign flickers in the background, buzzing softly. The man, mid-50s, worn but sharp, glances at the empty stool beside him. He nods slightly as if listening. Then he mutters, "Not yet." Mark stared at the line. "This is weird," he muttered. Olivia leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. She had been watching him obsess over the pages for hours. "What are you thinking?" He sighed. "I don't know. It's just, it reads like a confession, or like he was waiting for something. Someone." She didn't say what she was thinking, that maybe he still was. Mark exhaled, flipping to the last page. The script cut off abruptly mid-sentence, as if someone had been writing and then suddenly stopped. "I want to find out more," he said finally. Olivia's stomach tightened. "Mark, I mean, this could be something big. An unknown Ray Liotta project? Hollywood would lose its mind over this." She hesitated. "And if it's not just a lost script?" He glanced up at her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. The room felt colder now, despite the heater humming softly in the background. "What if it's a message?" Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, Liv." "A message from who?" A click sounded from the hallway. Both of them froze. The basement door. It was open. The basement door stood open. Not ajar. Not creaking on its hinges. Wide open. A dark, yawning mouth leading into the house's depths. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the heater filled the silence, but Olivia could no longer feel its warmth. The air around them had changed thicker, colder, like stepping into a room where someone had been only seconds before. Mark slowly pushed back his chair and stood. "Did you open that?" His voice was low, hesitant. Olivia shook her head. "I haven't gone near it." They both stared. The light from the hallway spilled down the first few steps, but the basement itself remained swallowed in darkness. It was as if the shadows down there were deeper than normal, resisting the light. Mark exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Okay," he muttered. "This is ridiculous." He took a step forward. "Mark, don't." But he was already moving, his bare feet soundless against the wooden floor. He stopped just before the doorway, peering down into the dark. Olivia held her breath. Then a noise. A slow, deliberate shuffle from below. Mark stiffened. Olivia felt her stomach twist. It was unmistakable. Something was down there. A beat of silence. Then, footsteps. Coming up the stairs. Olivia's breath hitched. "Mark," she whispered. But he didn't move, didn't blink. The footsteps were heavy, measured. One slow step at a time. Someone was climbing toward them. And then they saw it. A shadow stretched up the staircase, cast long against the wall by the dim light. But there was no figure. Just the shadow, tall, broad-shouldered, unmistakably human. Olivia clutched Mark's arm. "Close the door," she whispered. But Mark didn't move. He was frozen, his gaze locked on the staircase, his face pale. The shadow shifted. And then, a voice. Deep, rough, familiar. "Not yet." A gust of cold air rushed up the stairs, and suddenly the door slammed shut on its own. Olivia stumbled backward, gasping. Mark jumped, cursing under his breath. They both stared at the door, now closed, as if nothing had happened. The house was silent. No footsteps, no voice, just the faintest lingering scent of cigarette smoke. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Eventually, Mark let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Okay," he said, exhaling. "That was..." But Olivia wasn't listening. She was staring at the desk, at the unfinished script, at the last line, scrawled hastily at the bottom of the page. "Not yet." Her throat tightened. "Mark," she said slowly. He followed her gaze. The page, the one they had read just minutes ago, was different now. A new sentence had been added beneath the last line, written in the same hurried, uneven handwriting. One last scene. Olivia's hands turned ice-cold. She touched the paper, half expecting it to disappear under her fingers. But it was real. The ink looked fresh, the edges of the letters still slightly smudged, as if someone had written it just moments ago. Mark swallowed hard. "We need to leave." She looked up at him. "You believe me now?" He exhaled, glancing back at the basement door. "I don't know what I believe, but I know I don't want to stay here tonight." They left the house that night, checked into a hotel. Neither of them slept. The next morning, Mark made some calls. By the end of the week, they had listed the house for sale. They never spoke about the basement. Never spoke about the voice, the shadow, the footsteps. And though Mark sent the script to an archivist, no one could find any record of it. No mention of an unfinished project. No missing screenplay. It was as if it had never existed. But Olivia knew. Ray Liotta had never wanted to leave that house. And maybe, in some way, he still hadn't. But whatever he had been waiting for, whoever he had been waiting for, it wasn't time yet. And until that time came, the house would never be empty. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.